Welcome everybody. Hi, this is Jorianne the Coffee Psychic, and welcome to the show. We're going to have a little bit of a different show today, out of the ordinary, something that we normally don't talk about on my show, but a very, very important show. The topic is going to be PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, something that affects millions and millions of people. And we want to bring this to your attention just because of just how important it is and how it affects many of us. So many that you might even have PTSD and not know it. So today we have a wonderful guest. This is Mr. Paul McMickle joining us today. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you're so welcome. So we've been friends for quite a while, and we've been talking about this topic. It's something that really impacts me as a person because my father was in the military and he had PTSD. So can you share with us a little bit about your history and what really brought you here?
Yes, thanks. I had PTSD as a Vietnam veteran, not knowing that's what I had. It wasn't acknowledged in 1969 when I transitioned out of the military. So I thought that most of the things I was dealing with were normal because other people that had been in similar situations were also experiencing that. And then when it finally was acknowledged, there was no treatment available. They told us, well, you know, it's a personal problem that you have. So I went on a hunt for what could address the things that I was dealing with, which included things like going from smoking 1 pack of cigarettes a day to 4, consuming mass quantities of alcohol and it requiring more and more to achieve the desired result, which was to get completely numb and unconscious.
Sure.
Relationship failure. I was not a very good employee when I got out of the military. And I thought I was attributing it to the military, not to the condition that I was dealing with. So, like I said, I got out in 1969, and for 40 some odd years, I was trying everything possible. Workshops, mentoring, meditation, philosophical school, transformational programs, and they all seemed to have lessened some of the issues that I mentioned. So I quit smoking altogether, no more alcohol or other numbing substances. And only recently I discovered an organization that's come up with a unique intervention that doesn't require therapy or medication.
Okay.
And one of the biggest problems facing the military for sure right now is if they're diagnosed with PTSD, they can lose their security clearance if they have one, and they can even be put out of the military.
Oh my gosh.
So they're walking around with it, not talking about it.
I had no idea.
Yeah, well, it won't be on the 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock news.
Yes.
The other thing I found out, the name of the organization, by the way, is Brain Sweep Systems. It's a really powerful process that people can learn to do on their own.
Okay.
They don't have to disclose even their name. So no diagnosis.
Complete anonymity.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's particularly important because there's a stigma connected to it also. There's a consensus in the public that if you have PTSD, you're probably crazy and you're going to do something to either hurt others or hurt yourself or both.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you right there, okay?
Okay.
So what I'm going to say is that I have PTSD. And I had an experience when I was younger that I would not have known that it would have impacted me as an adult. And when I think about the word shell-shocked, right, that fits for this, doesn't it?
Yes, that's what they were calling it. first it was battle fatigue in World War I and the first part of World War II, and then they called it shell shock. And then they didn't have a name for the Korean or Vietnam veterans until fairly recently.
Okay, and what's that new name then?
PTSD.
Oh, that's when the new term came into place. So PTSD, you guys, is post-traumatic stress disorder. That's the right definition,
Yes.
correct? Okay. Now, Paul, I want to ask you, so I know myself, now I haven't been in the military, okay? So something happened to me, I started having certain reactions, not able to sleep at night, stuff like this. And first of all, I want to mention I'm not crazy, by the way. So I want to ask you, how many people, or what category of people, so this does not afflict just veterans, correct? Who else does something like PTSD affect?
According to the United Nations most recent survey, they think 61% of everybody in the world has some form of PTSD.
Wow.
So here are the various categories of, it's any type of trauma.
Okay.
It could be natural disasters, it could be abuse as a child, it could be physical abuse as an adult, all the domestic violence. First responders, people who run into burning buildings or have to deal with corpses and every possible kind of violence. Police departments, all of the various law enforcement all have it. Now, the thing that we didn't know until neuroscience gained the capability of actually taking pictures of the brain in different stages, so they can not only see that there are brain functions that are not mental illness,
Okay.
but also what parts of the brain are affected.
Okay.
There's something called compound PTSD,
Okay. Okay.
which is the people who have to be around the person who experienced the original trauma. So that would be the wives, husbands of the people who are the police officers or first responders, and then complex PTSD, which affects the children in those families.
So that would have been me.
Yes.
As part of it, because
Yep.
my father, I think, was in the not the Vietnam War, not World War II.
Korea.
Yeah. And so he would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. And of course that would, affect all of us. And then even his behaviors after he came home was different. It was different. It was reported to me. So it did affect us as children. Yeah.
Yes, and it goes farther back than that. I'll say more detail about that a little later, but one of the things that happens is, depending on the age of the children, like if they're anywhere from, I'd say, 2 years on to adolescence, their brains are still being formed, so they don't have a way to process what's happening. And when domestic violence occurs in a household, they haven't accurately diagnosed it. Like they've been calling, well, this is just a violent person who committed acts of violence, on other members of the family, without acknowledging that maybe it was the PTSD. And the people who commit those acts almost don't remember it afterward.
I was going to ask you about that. So some people, it's almost like being in a stupor, you'd
Yes.
say?
Yep.
Okay. So, so bad things can happen if they don't get this treated.
Yeah, and there's a wide range of bad things that can happen. So you may have heard that there's a disproportionate rate of suicide amongst veterans.
I have heard that, I'm sorry to
Like-
say.
The number they acknowledge is 25 a day, but it's way more than that. And they make it, whoever does the reporting on it,
Right, right.
make it sound like it's a character flaw of the person who dies from suicide.
Yeah.
And more often than not, they do it for a couple of reasons. One is they've not been able to integrate themselves back into civilian life.
Okay.
I only did 2.5 years in Vietnam, but there are people who did 4 and 5 and 6 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that takes a toll. and they're not being told honestly, this is one of the things that could happen if you sign this contract.
Right, right. Well, I just want to mention, you remember in our society, we're raising our children to be good, honest, loving, and, all around good people. And then we have to defend our country. It takes a lot for somebody to come in here and say, I'm giving up my life for our country. And I'm grateful to every single veteran. We all are. And many have died protecting our country. I've got a grandson right now in the Navy. So we take our little boys and then we teach them to be killers in defending our country. That has to have a major impact on who they are and who they become after this, because it's not something that we're training them as children to do.
Yeah, and that's a tricky subject, because it can sound like, well, and therefore we shouldn't have a military, or we shouldn't do that. There are some nasty people out there that you want to thank God there's a military to deal with them.
Yeah, yeah.
However, I personally question all the conflicts we get ourselves into, and we always find out after the fact that, oh, by the way, that didn't really happen. There weren't any weapons of mass destruction. There was no Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Yeah.
But by that time, it's too late. So, I would really like there to be a time when we find a way to resolve differences without blowing people up and all the other stuff that goes along with that.
Positively.
So there's a part of the brain called the amygdala.
Well, now we have pictures. We do have a picture that we can put up here. So if we can see a part of the...
It's actually not on the diagram, but I can point to...
Where it would be?
It's just under.
It's just under, okay.
Yeah, so if you look at the one on the bottom right, just behind there is a little walnut-shaped organ called the amygdala, which was the original part of the brain that was designed for survival.
Okay.
So if you've heard the expression fight, flight, or freeze,
Yes.
that's where that came from. It was evolved at a time when we had to be careful when we were outside, because we were food for other animals.
Okay.
So you had to know when to run, when to not move, because they chase things that move.
Right.
Or when to defend yourself.
Yes.
And then other parts of the brain evolved over time, but it didn't get rid of that part, because we still do have survival instincts that, unless you do something to intervene, you want those to be able to work.
We always want those to be able to work.
Yes.
That's even walking across the street, and suddenly out of the corner of your eye, you've got to, oh my God, jump for it because a car is coming close.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, the issue there is that part of the brain can't distinguish real threats from imagined ones.
Okay.
So one of the things that causes the nightmares and the restless sleep and the screaming in the middle of the night is those are memories that are coming up to the surface, and the brain is not distinguishing that, okay, you don't have to be afraid here. You're actually in your bed at home. You don't have to grab for your weapon or run for a bunker. Everything is okay. None of that conversation happens. It's like in a split second, you're back on.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things the military is highly effective at is training people to be on 24/7.
Okay.
Like you are never daydreaming, wondering what you should be doing next. It's like radar, you always got your eyes and ears open. I remember my buddies used to tease me when I was in Vietnam. They said I could hear a mosquito fart at 1,000 yards.
Wow.
And they were pretty accurate.
Wow.
Because it got so dark there that you literally could not see your hand in front of your face.
Wow.
I had never been in total darkness before.
Yes.
When there's no artificial light whatsoever except maybe the stars, and then when there's a full moon, it's almost like high noon here.
I remember one of the stories that my dad had shared with us, and that's never light a third cigarette when you're on the field.
You don't want to light a first one.
Yeah.
Because the weaponry is so sophisticated. In fact, eve of the Tet Offensive, which was the Vietnamese New Year, when all of the years past, there was a mutually agreed upon ceasefire.
Mm-hmm.
This particular one, they decided they were going to attack every base in South Vietnam.
Wow.
So I was sitting on a bunker. I had resolved that I'm not going to sleep at night because bad stuff happened at night.
Yeah.
So for the last year and a half, I learned to take 15-minute naps. I could sleep standing up if I had to.
Wow.
In broad daylight. So I was doing what they said never do, which was smoke a cigarette in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just leaned forward to light my buddy's cigarette, and a bullet went past my ear close enough for me to feel the breeze from it.
Wow. Wow. That had to be frightening.
To say the least.
Yes.
Because shortly after that, the aviation fuel and the ammunition dump on the other side of our airfield blew up. So that's when we knew that bad stuff was about to happen.
Yeah. You know, Paul, I want to ask you, how has this emotionally impacted your life today?
Well, there's growth impact, and there's the kind that holds you back.
Okay.
So the growth part was, I was on a quest. First of all, you get really religious in combat.
Okay. I heard there's no atheists in a foxhole.
None. And as many near-death experiences as I had, I was pretty clear somebody was watching out for me.
Amen.
So I don't have any issue about that, and you can call it, whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. I'd call it God and your angels. That's what I'd call it. Yep.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
there was a comedy routine about the 2000 Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. They did this recording, and they said they had a 2,000-year-old man, and they were interviewing, and they said, well, you're the only living person that was around during the time of Jesus. We got some questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
They said, what was it like back then? Like, was God really present? And they said, no. They had this Philistine named Phil, and he was about 12 feet tall and weighed about 1,000 pounds and carried this gigantic club, and he used to go around knocking people's heads off. And we used to pray to Phil, oh, please, Phil, don't knock our heads off. And then one day Phil got struck by lightning, and that's when they knew there was somebody bigger than Phil. So the bigger than Phil guy watched out for a lot of us.
Yes.
And back to your question, the impact was I came home with a lot of questions about me, about how the world had changed since I was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean everything changed, from the geography of the neighborhood where I lived to the whole city landscape to what was on TV. And even today, people ask me things like, remember back in 1967 when such and such happened? Didn't happen where I was.
Oh, there you go. No, that's
so
true.
I have no idea. I had a whole 2.5-year gap where I was not being reported in the news. My mom used to send me newspaper articles about allegedly what was happening and who the casualties were, and I was in some of those places where that stuff was happening, and that was not what happened.
Wow. Oh, wow. Wow, now that's interesting.
Yeah, so we were lucky to get out alive, and not all of us did each time.
Yeah.
So back to the growth impact, I learned the value of discipline and being reliable for doing what I said I was going to do. Something as basic as being on time for things.
Yeah.
I used to be notoriously late for work. It's like no matter what I tried, some circumstance would happen, and I would end up being, anywhere from 5 minutes to a half hour late. And that just occurred as, well, there's some people that are on time, and some people are early, and some people are late, and I'm in the late category. So that was one of the things that I learned. And I took it on as a habit just because it made a difference.
Okay.
And one of the things they told us is that there's a trick to never being late. Just be early.
Okay.
So and the motto there is early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So I incorporated that, much to the chagrin of my family and friends who were notoriously late. We always had to give them a false number of the start time of whatever we were doing to allow for the half hour to 45 minutes late they were going to be every time.
Wow. Wow.
Another impact was not accepting what everybody else thought about something as, well, that must be how it is. Like, to really question, is this so or not? And I think it took maybe a month, the first month I was in Vietnam, when I saw that what was happening there had nothing to do with what was being shown on television.
Yeah.
And even though there was a minute part of it that was accurate, like you'd see helicopters landing and, you know, people being carried off on stretchers and things like that. Well, that was like a little piece of it. But they didn't show what was going on behind the scenes, like the amount of black marketing that was going on that we were participating in, or the amount of drug trafficking that our government was engaged in.
Okay.
And that was actually the source of the war. It had nothing to do with, you know, the Buddhists and the Catholics or the North and South Vietnamese. And in fact, I only found out about 25 years after the war that the real reason the North Vietnamese were after us was because we had promised them to be allies, and we were going to protect them from the Chinese, because Vietnam had been under attack by everybody for the last 400 years.
Wow.
They've been at war with somebody, and they never lost, by the way. That record alone should have had somebody go, wait a minute, is this a good idea? So anyway, Ho Chi Minh wanted to be an ally of the United States, and we promised it, and then we bailed on him, and he said, okay, I'll show you.
Wow.
And
now
he
that
did.
I didn't know. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well,
Probably many people didn't know that.
yes. The history we've been told was the original fake news.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was somebody's story, but it left out a lot of the details.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to the impact. I had to reintegrate myself into social settings, because for a long time I didn't want to be around people.
Now, why do you think that is, though?
Well, that's a good question. Part of it was the stuff they were talking about had zero interest to me.
Okay.
So, you know, if they were interested in politics, fine, because I've been a political animal since I was 11.
Wow.
But, you know, all that stuff about the weather or who won the game or any of that stuff is like,
Not
Just-
interesting.
yeah, brain farts. And I also noticed that they had biases that I didn't agree with. So I had the good fortune of growing up in a neighborhood that was more like the United Nations. So all my childhood friends were Mexican and Puerto Rican and Italian and German and Irish and Lithuanian. And we used to take turns, you know, all the different houses would babysit. So I knew how to say what's for dinner in a whole bunch of languages.
That's cute.
So it was alarming to me that people, irrespective of their particular ethnicity, were castigating other races and nationalities based on who knows what. I think it's basically because they didn't know them. They didn't talk to anybody other than people that looked and sounded like them. So anyway, I stayed away from that stuff, and I tried to, I consider myself an ongoing learner. Like I like learning new stuff, and I think since the brain is a muscle, if you don't exercise it, it does what other muscles do when you don't exercise it. It gets flabby.
I think it's called atrophy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then trying things that were outside of what people who grew up the way I did would try. For instance, I'm an excellent equestrian.
Okay.
I was going to be on the 72 Olympic equestrian team. I just didn't get enough backing to do it, but
Wow.
I was really good.
Now let me ask you, horses?
Yes.
Wow, how exciting. I didn't know that about you.
There's a long story about how that happened. I didn't seek it out, but that'll be another show.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll do that.
And there are not a lot of African American skiers, but I became one of those, and then I liked it so much that I took up downhill racing.
Wow, wow.
And, you know, my mother used to tell me that all of her gray hairs could be attributed to the crazy stuff that I tried.
There you go. So you're really a very well-rounded person, even in spite of the military, right? Now, did some of these achievements come after the military as a way
Yes.
of dealing with life and
Yes.
coping? Okay.
Yeah, I talked earlier about having to be always on. So coming back into civilian life was like walking into a slow motion movie.
Wow.
Things move so much slower, and the body gets acclimated to a certain pace of things. It's like, I don't think I walked anywhere for about the first 6 or 8 months that I got home, because I was used to running everywhere.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's interesting, really.
And it just became a habit. First of all, bad stuff used to happen to people that walked. So
Okay.
you can't walk out of the way of a bullet, but you can
You can dodge
can
it.
run, yeah.
You can run, yep.
And I was in the best physical shape of my life. I could run 5 miles carrying 120 pounds of gear and not even be out of breath.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. So your body really became a machine. Yeah.
Well, body and mind.
Yeah, yeah. So how did that impact your family life? So it impacted you emotionally, but how did that impact you as a family person, Paul?
Well, my mom and my aunts and cousins and the folks that I spent the most time with prior to the military kept wanting me to be the person I was before I left.
Okay.
And
what was that basically?
Nonviolent, peaceful, shy. A conversation with me back then would be like, "Hi, how are you? Fine. Well, what's going on? Oh, nothing. Well, I mean, it was disastrous.
Wow. You were a kid. You're a young person. And then they put you into the military, and you changed.
Yeah, and it was partly due to that amygdala that I talked about. Now, they
Yes.
didn't tell us any of this. There
Yeah.
just was a regimen of training. So I remember the first day of basic training, they said, your mama's not coming to save you. You're in the Army now. Your rear end belongs to me. No, they said, your rear end is grass and I'm the lawnmower.
Okay.
And I said, excuse me, drill sergeant, but I really need about 10 to 12 hours sleep a night. And when he got through laughing, he said, you'll be lucky if you get that much in a week. And I thought he was kidding.
Wow.
But he wasn't, because formation started at 3 a.m. At
Okay.
3:05, you had to be outside in formation, boots shined, buckles polished, uniforms pressed.
Wow.
And then they worked us until midnight. And then between midnight and 3, we had to do our laundry, wax and buff the floors,
Oh my gosh.
and clean the latrines. So he was right. I think I did average about 12 hours a week.
Wow. But was that surprising to you that you could survive on that little sleep and
Yes,
get things done?
It was beyond surprising. It was a good news, bad news kind of thing.
Okay.
Because on the weekends, they say you can sleep in on Saturday. Sleep in meant 5 o'clock instead of 3.
Wow.
And for the entire time in training, we hated our drill instructors because we didn't appreciate at the time what they were trying to accomplish, which was to give us everything they had to get us back home in one piece.
Amen. And you can see that afterward when you come home. Yeah.
Well, I figured it out about the last week of training, because I saw the transition in myself and the people with me, and we literally were kids. I mean, I was the grandpa of the group because I was drafted at age 21.
Wow.
And the rest of them were 17, 18, 19, with not nearly the background that I had. So they were always looking to me as the elders, like,
right. Here, ask the shy guy.
yeah. And because I had been in ROTC in high school and, Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and Explorers and Civil Air Patrol, so I had the uniform and the military orientation already as a background.
Yeah.
There were some people who literally couldn't walk in a straight line and didn't know their right from their left. They had to tell them clutch and brake because they knew that on the cars. So the training was useful in many ways. One was our motto was, in Special Forces, it's the difficult we do immediately and the impossible takes 24 hours.
Wow, I like that.
So
How was that for you, though?
By the time I heard that, it made sense, because to not operate that way meant bad stuff was going to happen to you and the people around you, and we were not an infantry unit. We were more intelligence gathering, and special operations is a whole other category. Everybody thought that, you must be like Rambo. No, that was Hollywood stuff. And yes, there were some people like that. We try to keep them off to the side.
So I want to ask you, so when you're in the military, is it more a partnership in a community where you guys really are watching each other's backs?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
It's not an individual.
Nope.
It's like you guys are a team, and you act like a team, you work like a team, eat, breathe, everything like a team.
Yep.
Yeah.
From the start of training all the way through.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that's missing in civilian life when you come back. There's no one like that, not even family members. And in fact, sometimes the family members are the ones that cause the most grief.
How so?
Because they're expecting the same person to return as the one who left. And that doesn't happen and can't happen, like not ever.
Yeah.
And no one prepared them for that. So it's an upset for the family members, and it's an upset for the returning veteran, because there's certain things that they just are not going to tolerate anymore. And then a lot of the veteran suicide is done because they're afraid they're going to harm their family, so they'd rather kill themselves than stick around and wake up in the middle of the night thinking they're under attack.
So I want to ask you, now you've been dedicated to helping the veterans for a long time. When you first started getting involved in this, was it because of the emotional things that you were experiencing yourself?
Yes.
And then you realized how many of your other veteran brothers have been going through the same thing. Did you start researching it, Paul? I don't know if you started with the thought of suicide, but what made you go there?
Well, let's see, I'll have to back up some. So when I first got out, there was an organization called Vietnam Veterans Against the War.
Okay.
And as soon as I found out about it, I joined. So
Okay.
me and a gentleman named Bart Savage, who also was, we knew each other in Vietnam, got active in that.
Okay.
And we were not against the veterans. We were against what veterans had to do because we knew it was under false pretenses.
Okay.
And we tried to educate young people. Remember, this was right during the anti-war movement, so there were a lot of people, because of what they saw on television, who were opposed to it, and for various reasons. Some of them were opposed to war altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Some were opposed because they had family members who had been drafted. There was no lottery at this time. Everybody was drafted, and nobody was saying, "Oh, yes, sign me up for that program. I want to go do that."
Yeah.
And there was a disproportionate number of poor and African American and Hispanic people who were being drafted.
Okay.
So this is right along that whole time period between 64 and 66, 67.
Okay.
And then Dr. King came out against the war, and that was like another thing on top of, they were already annoyed that the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Acts had been passed into law.
Okay.
And that upset a lot of the good old boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, by the way, there were plenty of them in Vietnam also, and they had trained the Vietnamese to think the way they did.
Okay.
So the good news was most of the Vietnamese didn't buy it because they're brown people too. So
There you go.
I had a different relationship with them than some of my Caucasian buddies
Okay. Okay.
because they saw us as people, and they know what it's like to be under oppression from outside people who think they're less than just because they're not of European descent. So again, that's another show.
That is.
So
you joined that organization early on.
yeah,
What did that bring in view for you?
well, I saw it was an opportunity to illuminate something for people where they weren't being given almost any information about it. And actually, it started when I was in college. Before I was drafted, I was attending a city college, and there were military branches that were trying to recruit on our campus.
Okay.
And I was president of the student government at the time, and I made sure they didn't come on the campus
Wow.
to recruit. And I had belonged to an organization called the American Friends Service Committee, which was a pacifist organization.
Okay.
So I was against the war before there was a movement around it.
Yeah.
And then I got drafted, and then I saw it from the inside, and then I was really against it.
Wow. Wow.
So
And yet you still performed your service for our country. Yeah.
yes.
Wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and I would do it again under honorable circumstances, but we haven't had those for a while.
Yeah.
So when 9/11 happened, before I found out more details about that,
Mm-hmm.
I was ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but we're in a precarious situation right now with regard to that. So far too many people are having to deal with it, and they're setting up these PTSD scenarios,
Mm-hmm.
and the treatments that they're offering, which is therapy and medication, have worse side effects than the condition itself.
Okay. Well, let's go into that a little bit more then, shall
Okay.
we?
Yeah.
Okay. So you went from that earlier program. You became even more dedicated to helping all of the people that have come, all of the vets and stuff like this. So as you're expanding your awareness and your knowledge, you're realizing and you're coming to know that it's not just the vets, it's the first responders, it's anyone that had a traumatic experience. That's why I was saying this literally can be you if you've had any kind of trauma, anything that you've experienced, and suddenly you can't sleep. There's other strange behaviors that you're starting to show. And so what you're saying now, Paul, is that there's help for anybody that has post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think the first step is really diagnosing that first, to go to somebody, find out if this is there, if it's safe for them to do that. Like you said, there are some people that could be kicked out of a situation. So I guess my question would be, first off, how can our general public, whether they're vets or not, and the vets, believe me, I'm sure that they know. My dad had it. It's a bad situation. But how can they go to somebody to find out if they have it? Okay, first off. And then, so I want you to answer that. And then I want you to tell us about this amazing program, because I've actually tried it with you, and I'm telling you, this stuff works. It works.
Well, that's a good question, and here's why. Because there's a couple of things that people deal with. So first of all, almost everyone that I've worked with since I started this, the minute I mentioned it to them, their response was, "Oh no, I don't have PTSD."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's partly due to the stigma associated with it,
Mm-hmm.
and partly because they've not been informed that this is any kind of trauma which leads to depression and all kinds of other behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
that prior to neuroscience was being diagnosed by psychiatrists and psychologists with theories,
Right.
but no real way to prove it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now we can take pictures of the brain in all these various situations, and you've heard about the athletes who died from suicide and then donated their brains, and then they can now see that, yes, this was due to either traumatic brain injury or PTSD or both.
Yeah, yeah.
So rather than having people seek treatment, I would have them ask the question, I wonder if I have any of those symptoms.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then whether they think they have it or not, to engage in doing something about it. And I can't legally say, and therefore don't seek out therapy or medication, because
Right.
that could result in bad news for everybody. But I can tell you that at Brain Sweep Systems, that is what we do.
Okay.
And
So I got hit in the head as a child with a bat, and that was in front of an entire backyard full of school children. And I would not, and I had a concussion, and then I had grand mal seizure disorder from this incident, which of course really created me to become psychic. That's, I think, one of the traumas I had that enhanced my psychic abilities. So it could be something like a head injury. It could be seeing a car accident, seeing people die. It could be anything. And you're just thinking, I only had one experience. How could that be that it's impacting me this way? But it can't it?
absolutely. And you don't have to die from the car accident or see someone. You can be in the accident yourself. You often hear people who have survived those kinds of accidents say things like, everything slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a function of the brain. So one of the things we do with Brain Sweep is distinguish how the mind functions versus the brain. And the brain's job is simply to deal with what's happening right now in this second to survive. And then everything else is pushed off to the side. So I recall the first time I was wounded, I didn't know it because I didn't feel it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What got my attention was I felt moisture in my boots, and I wasn't in any water, and I couldn't figure out where did that come from. I looked down, and it was full of blood. So then it's like, but I didn't have time to stop and go, oh my, I've been shot, because we were on the move.
Yeah.
So everything was fine, and then about 5 hours later, it was like,
Then you felt the shock.
yeah,
So do you think you went into shock
yes.
when you got
Well,
hit, but then you just stayed going on?
No, it's not shock. Shock happens when you go unconscious.
Okay.
That's a whole other level of the brain protecting you.
Okay.
But this shuts down everything, pumps adrenaline to make sure you've got all the energy you need to deal with the situation right then, and it
Okay.
has no distinction between right or wrong. It's like if you gotta take somebody out in order for you to survive, you don't care who it is, how old they are, none of that.
Okay. So basically, it's a threat that the human the
Yes.
human being experiences, either real or imagined.
Yep,
Okay. Any kind of threat.
any threat.
And that impacts all of us.
Yep. Even the kids who saw that happen when you were hit by the bat, they were impacted by it too.
Yeah, yeah.
Except they don't know that.
And I'll bet none of them became professional psychics from the situation either.
Well, probably not. They missed out on that gift.
Yes, they did. So, so then you went from taking this on, and you went out to reach out and impact as many people as you could, trying to really work with these people. Because I know we've talked about this in the past, and this program is here to help anybody. It's set up for the military, but it's really here to help anybody that's had been impacted this way, post-traumatic stress disorder. I know, Paul, that you are a complete stand for people. You are, just as a human being you are, and I'm really proud to know you. I think you're an amazing man. And so what do you do now? So you're part of this organization, Brain Sweep, and what do you do to help people? Like, how does this work? Do you just chat with people, or do they find you, or what do you do? How does this work? How does this work?
Well, there's I don't know how much demonstrating I can do, but there's a part of the brain that's connected directly to this part of the hand.
So this is like kinesiology.
Yes.
So what we know is that there's acupressure points running throughout the entire body that relate to every different part of the body. So we have another picture that we can bring up here, right here. If we can bring that up, Bill.
No,
Okay.
No.
So, can we get the one that has the spine, the entire body with the spine? That's it. So, Paul, tell us about this, because it's kinesiology, correct? Or acupuncture
Well,
points.
it has some of that. The term for it is neurokinesis.
Okay, neurokinesis. Explain that to us.
It's basically movements of the hand that connect to parts of the brain that bypass the mind. So in other therapy modalities, they require rehashing the memories, tell us about what happened, how did you feel,
Yeah.
all those questions. And many people don't seek out therapy for the reason that they don't want to revisit those.
They just don't want to relive the pain,
Nope.
right? So this shortcuts it then.
Yes.
And yet it's still effective.
Yes. It's
Okay,
highly effective.
So tell us about that.
Well, back in December of last year, we did a study with several groups. One group was people who knew they had PTSD and they were seeking any kind of treatment. The other things they tried hadn't worked.
Okay.
Another group wasn't sure they had it, but they were going to give it a try. The third group were people who thought this was complete baloney, there's no way it could work, and they weren't expecting any results, and they got the best results of all of them.
Wow, wow. So what did they report? So what did you guys do? How long
Well,
did it take?
here's what there were 5 areas that we looked at. So one was how effectively are you sleeping, like sound sleep, not just, cat naps, etc., or restless sleep. And then how frequently, if at all, are you having the recurring memories or
Okay.
nightmares or things like that. And then another was, well, have the people around you noticed any behavioral differences?
Okay.
Are you finding yourself getting upset about the things you used to get upset by?
Okay.
And better than 60% of the people said that they got results far beyond anything they expected.
Yes.
And in most clinical studies, if you can get a 30% positive response, that's enough for the FDA to approve the latest drug.
Oh my, that's wonderful.
And we had 60,000 people in the study, and most studies don't have nearly that many. They'll do anywhere from a few hundred to maybe 1,000, unless it's a longitudinal study where they're tracking people over a 20 or 30-year period.
Okay. So were you guys thinking about doing that? Are you tracking the clients?
Well, If we had poor results in the beginning, yes, we would do that. I'm sure there are going to be other studies because we want the insurance companies to start funding this because the amount of money they're paying for people with PTSD right now is astronomical.
Wow.
So, in fact, on this coming Saturday in Burbank, California, we're launching the radio show, and the first day is going to be a panel of doctors, a panel of insurers who are going to say, this is how much money we spend.
Wow.
A large percentage of health insurance costs is on prescription medication.
Now I'm going to tell you, as a professional psychic, I literally have goosebumps running throughout my whole body right now, which is a positive reaction to, I think this is really going to take off and help people. And apparently it's going to save our government a lot of money and the insurance companies a lot of money.
Yep, not to mention lives.
Yes, yes. Yes, because this not only is going to help people move past all of these bad memories, but this has already stopped people from committing suicide, correct?
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and in fact, what you don't hear much about is the rate of child suicide.
Yeah.
So one of the things our founder, Karen Saborin, has come up, she's a brilliant woman, by the way. She's having an app developed for phones so that when children feel like they're on the verge of suicide or they're experiencing anxiety of any kind, they can go to the phone, they can learn the hand technique that we do.
Okay.
And there's a button that will connect them with someone that can walk them through, I know how you feel right now, it's not the best plan.
Yeah.
Come and talk to somebody and let's work through this together kind of thing.
So like a hotline.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful.
But on their phone, because you know they're doing this
The kids are always on the
24/7.
phone. Yeah, yeah.
So, and we've gotten a lot of resistance from people who don't want to see this come to fruition because it's going to mean a loss of revenue for a lot of people.
Drug companies?
Drug companies, psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists.
Oh my God, but the psychiatrist and psychologist can have them come into the office to learn this technique. So it can actually be an enhancement to their work. I studied to be a therapist. I didn't finish going into the area, but so this is something that they can take in as a tool and help them with their clients.
There's a German philosopher named Arthur Schopenhauer,
Okay.
and he said, every innovation goes through 3 phases. First, it's ridiculed,
Okay.
then it's violently opposed,
Okay.
then it serves as self-evident.
Okay.
So we're right in between the ridicule and bordering on the violently opposed right now.
Okay.
So-
And tell me, statistically speaking, what were the test results with your studies? Like, it wasn't 30%, what was it? That people actually reported seeing a difference, or they don't have their nightmares anymore, they can sleep. I mean, what were they saying? What were the results?
Well, let me say, so it was over 60%.
Wow.
But in addition to that, even though the study didn't request comments about their experience, we got over 60,000 comments about how great it was and things over and above the questions we were asking.
Okay.
So those are all included in the study. And there is going to be another one, just because if you only do one study, then they say, well, that was just luck.
Okay. Well, there should be continuing studies.
Yeah, and there will
right?
be,
Yeah, this
because
will be
we're
ongoing.
finding that this methodology can work on more things than just PTSD.
Yes, and I want to tell you, I'm also a hypnotherapist, so I know for years working with the mind, the unconscious mind, there's stuff that's buried there. But the important part here is that you, with your new methodology, you don't have to revisit the different memories that cause a lot of emotional pain. You're just sitting there, you're having somebody speak with you, giving you some communications, some guidance on what you're supposed to be doing when you're doing the hand gestures, and it's basically just your hand gestures.
Yep.
But that hand gesture is so specific that it hits with the neurokinesiology, right? It hits a certain part that affects your brain. Now, you a moment ago had said the difference between the brain and the mind, right? So, and I can't believe our time has, the show is just amazing. Thank you for coming on. But would you describe to our viewers what's the difference between the brain and the mind?
Okay, well, first
and
of all,
where our thoughts lie, right?
the brain is an actual organ.
Okay.
Like if we open your skull, we can find it. You can't find a mind anywhere.
Okay.
It's a term that was invented to distinguish certain behaviors, and a lot of the memories for survival are stored there.
Okay.
So everything that's ever happened to us, everything we've ever seen, heard, smelled, touched, or tasted is there. You can think of it as your human hard drive.
Okay.
The problem is there's many files that we don't have the passwords to.
Okay. So these are like programs, your old programs that are running in the background that you don't even know are impacting you, correct? Yep. Okay, and this helps get to those without you even having to revisit them.
Yes. And there are two more things I want to say before our time runs out. One is that there's body memory associated with trauma.
Okay.
And it can be passed on genetically to offspring. So I have a client right now who, as a younger person, was abused, and then now that she has a 7-year-old son, even though there's no abuse from age 17 on, now at age 38, her son is demonstrating the same trauma behaviors as if he was the victim, except nothing's happened.
So you're like cellular memory.
Yep.
So I want to say this is Paul McMickle. This is with Brain Sweep, right? And you
Brain
do this
Sweep Systems.
Brain Sweep Systems. You do this work all the time.
Yep.
Something you're completely dedicated to help not just the Vietnam vets, but everybody. Now, do you happen to have a book out yet, Paul?
Not yet, but there's one in the offing, so stay tuned.
Okay, very good, very good. And our time's almost up here, so I want to say, is there one thing that you can say to people that are suffering out here and they're really afraid to come forward? What can you tell people?
First of all, you don't have to continue suffering. There's no stigma attached to it. Whatever you've heard in the past, it's not the truth. And you don't have to deal with this on your own. You can be completely anonymous, no medications, no therapy. We don't even have to know any of the details, and we can do it online, so we don't even have to meet face to face.
Yeah. And again, I've been doing this for a little while, and it's just something that I didn't expect myself, so I thought, I'm going to give this a try and see how it's working, and it's really made a difference for me. It really has. And again, we don't even know when these things, we can have an experience that happened when we were a kid. I had a car accident with a deer jumping out in front of my car, and when you said things slow down,